I turned 68 3 weeks after my husband humiliated me in front of everyone he knew. It happened on a Friday night, in a private dining room at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Cleveland, the kind with dark wood walls, heavy linen napkins, and steaks that cost more than my first car. 40 people sat around a long, polished table. Business partners, old college friends, their spouses, people who had watched our life from the outside and assumed they knew the story. My husband, Thomas Reed, stood at the head of the table, lifting his crystal glass. He smiled the way he always did when he thought he was about to impress a room. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "since everyone's here, I might as well be honest." People leaned in, forks paused midair. He turned toward me and said, loud enough for every corner of the room to hear, "Happy birthday. And congratulations. You're officially a failure. I'm done. We're done." The room burst into laughter. Not nervous laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind that means people had been waiting for permission. Someone clinked their glass. Someone else actually cheered. To his right sat a woman I had never been formally introduced to, young enough to be my daughter. Her manicured hand resting easily on his forearm like it had always belonged there. She didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a plain black envelope. No label. No return address. I slid it across the table toward him. "Before you celebrate," I said, my voice calm enough that the laughter slowly died, "you might want to explain to your sisters why their tuition payments disappeared this afternoon, and to your parents why the deed to their lake house was flagged tonight, and to your partners why the firm's accounts are locked before Monday morning." You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Thomas stared at the envelope like it might bite him. I stood up, smoothed my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought at Macy's years ago, back when I still dressed for myself, and walked out while phones started buzzing one by one around the table. That was the night everything he built began to collapse. But to understand how I sat there so steady, you need to know what came before that moment. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, in a 2-bedroom ranch house off Route 20. After my father died when I was 12, my mother worked double shifts at St. Vincent Medical Center, measuring her life in 12-hour blocks and grocery receipts. We stretched every dollar. Gas was counted in gallons. Meat was bought on sale. Heat stayed low in winter. I learned early that being quiet kept you safe. Being observant kept you ahead. That habit followed me through community college, then night classes at Bowling Green State, and later into my marriage. When I met Thomas, he was loud, ambitious, always talking about the next deal. I thought we balanced each other. I didn't realize then that I was planting the seeds of my own erasure. And the truth is, even that night at the steakhouse, I didn't yet know how far the rot really went. After that night, people assumed I'd planned everything for years. The truth is quieter. In the days leading up to my birthday, I still believed, naively, that embarrassment was the worst thing Thomas was capable of. I thought the whispers I'd noticed at church brunches and charity luncheons were just gossip. I thought the distance in our house was age, routine, the slow creak of a long marriage settling into itself. Our home sat on a cul-de-sac in Westlake. Brick front, 2-car garage, lawn measured and trimmed every Saturday. Inside, everything ran on habit. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., black, 1 teaspoon of sugar for him. The Wall Street Journal folded just so on the kitchen counter. The thermostat never moved from 72. I moved through those mornings like furniture. Present. Useful. Unquestioned. The first crack came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray Ohio day where the sky never quite decides what it wants to do. I was in the study, backing up household files, insurance statements, retirement accounts, the usual paperwork you organize when you're thinking about the future. That's when I saw a folder I didn't recognize. It wasn't hidden well. That was the strange part. Just labeled Q4 changes. Inside were drafts, notes, a restructured plan for Thomas's consulting firm. New titles, new leadership, familiar names. Mine wasn't there. Not as operations, not as advisor, not even as support. There was a line that stopped me cold. Transition to proceed after personal matters are resolved. Personal matters. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen while the house hummed around me. The refrigerator cycling on. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticking off seconds I suddenly felt. Later that week at Heinen's grocery store, I ran into Margaret, one of Thomas's longtime clients. She smiled too quickly. "Oh," she said, glancing at my cart. "I didn't realize you were still handling things." Still, that was the word. That was the moment I understood something important. Whatever Thomas was planning, it wasn't sudden. And it wasn't just personal. It was systematic. And without knowing it yet, I had already been removed from the story he was telling everyone else. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. After that grocery store conversation, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not emotionally, practically. Like someone reviewing a balance sheet after realizing the numbers don't add up. Thomas's firm, Reed Strategic Group, had always been his on paper. But in real life, it was built inside our dining room, on a scratched oak table we bought from IKEA back in the early 2000s. I remembered nights when he paced with a cordless phone pressed to his ear while I sat with a calculator, checking projections, correcting assumptions, flagging risks. Back then, he'd say things like, "You've got a good head for this," or "You should have gone into finance." Somewhere along the way, those comments stopped. Instead, I became "My wife, Ellen. She keeps everything organized." That's how he introduced me. At conferences in Chicago, hotel ballrooms in Columbus, banquet halls off the interstate where the carpet smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning spray. I smiled. I nodded. I took notes no one asked to see. In my generation, women were taught that keeping the peace was a virtue. That if you were steady enough, loyal enough, eventually it would count for something. So I stayed quiet when I noticed my access to certain accounts temporarily restricted. I didn't ask why my name disappeared from internal emails. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, a tech issue, a phase. The second crack came by accident. One afternoon, I stopped at a small cafe near Public Square downtown, a place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. I ordered a turkey sandwich and iced tea, sat by the window, and opened a book I never finished reading. Two women sat behind me. One of them I recognized instantly. Claire, Thomas's executive assistant. She didn't lower her voice. "I swear," Claire said, laughing softly. "I don't know how she doesn't see it coming." The other woman asked, "The birthday thing? That's really how he's doing it?" "Oh, absolutely. Private room, everyone there, clean break, lawyers already lined up. He's been careful. She won't have a leg to stand on." They laughed again. Not cruelly, casually, like discussing weather. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. I just listened. "She still thinks she's helping," Claire added. "Poor thing." That was when I realized something important. I wasn't just being left. I was being erased. That night, Thomas came home late. He smelled like cologne I didn't recognize. He kissed my cheek like muscle memory and went straight to bed. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at my reflection in the dark window, and felt something inside me settle. Not anger, clarity. The next morning, I called Janice Miller, an old friend from my church group who'd spent 30 years in compliance and auditing before retiring. We met at a Panera off I-90, both of us holding lukewarm coffee and paper cups. I didn't dramatize anything. I laid out the facts, the files, the conversations, the changes. Janice listened quietly, then leaned forward. "Ellen," she said, "this isn't about a marriage ending. This is about ownership. And he's counting on you staying polite." That sentence stayed with me, so I stopped being polite. With my silence, I went home and started pulling records. Slowly, carefully, not hacking, not snooping, just reviewing things I had every right to access. Old contracts, early drafts, email chains from years back, stored on an external hard drive we'd forgotten about in a desk drawer. What I found surprised even me. The core methodologies Thomas pitched as his proprietary framework, they were built on models I'd refined over decades, adjustments I'd made, risk tolerances I'd recalculated when markets shifted after 2008. My fingerprints were everywhere, but my name wasn't. That's when I began doing something new in my life. I began preparing. I consulted an attorney in Rocky River, a woman close to my age who didn't flinch when I told her the whole story. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked what I could prove. At night, after Thomas fell asleep on the couch watching cable news, I sat at the kitchen table with a laptop and a legal pad. I documented everything. Dates, versions, changes. I created backups. I organized evidence the way I'd once organized our lives. There was a moment about 2 weeks before my birthday when I almost stopped. It happened when my daughter called from Ann Arbor asking about Thanksgiving plans. Her voice was cheerful, unaware. I stared at the calendar on the fridge, still marked with my birthday dinner reservation, and felt the old instinct rise up. Keep things smooth, don't disrupt. Then Thomas walked in, glanced at the calendar, and smirked. Big night coming up, he said. You'll like it. That's when I knew. If I stayed quiet, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I'd lose the truth. So I kept going. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn anyone. I let things proceed exactly as he planned. I confirmed the reservation. I bought a new dress from Talbot's, conservative, unremarkable. I smiled at his parents during Sunday dinner while they complained about property taxes on their lake house in Portage Lakes. When his sister mentioned tuition payments for her youngest, I nodded sympathetically. Inside, the pieces were already moving. The night of my birthday arrived cold and clear, the kind of Ohio night where the city lights feel sharp. The steakhouse glowed when we walked in, valet taking the car, coats checked. Laughter spilled from the private room before we even opened the door. Everything unfolded exactly as Claire said it would. The toast, the words, the laughter, and then the envelope. What no one at that table understood was that the envelope wasn't a threat. It was a timeline. As I walked out into the night, my phone began vibrating. Alerts, confirmations, legal triggers executing one after another. By the time I reached my car, the story Thomas had been telling for years was already unraveling. And the most ironic part? He had handed me the perfect stage to finally tell mine. People think revenge looks loud. It doesn't. By Monday morning, the firm Thomas built on borrowed credit and borrowed brilliance was frozen in place. Accounts flagged, contracts paused, partners asking questions no one could answer without saying my name out loud for the first time. I didn't rush to watch it happen. I made oatmeal. I measured coffee grounds by the scoop, not the memory. Life went on in inches, not explosions. The real twist wasn't that I took anything back. It was that I never had to take it in the first place. Everything I protected, every document, every model, every decision had always been mine. I simply stopped pretending otherwise. When the lawyers finished untangling the mess, I didn't ask for public apologies or dramatic statements. I asked for one thing only: acknowledgement. At my age, you learn something important. Justice isn't about humiliation. It's about balance. Thomas lost the story he'd been telling. I kept the truth I'd been living. Today, my life is smaller in square footage and larger in peace. I volunteer. I advise quietly. I sleep without wondering if I'm being erased while smiling. And when people ask what I regret, I tell them this: I regret waiting so long to believe that dignity doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself.